The financial planning process puts all of it together and paints a picture that you can easily track and follow. A good financial plan is a living document and with an advisor that's with you all the time. I see every one of my clients 5 to 6 times a year in person. I usually drive to their home. It limits the number of clients I can have, but I do a really good job that way. And my clients know what they have and why. Really, really important. So I talked about withdrawals a little bit, right? 70.5. Anybody know why 70.5 is important? The government has a rule. All that tax shelter you've had all your life, at 70.5, it's no longer allowed to stay in there. You have to take it out. It's called mandatory withdrawals. At 70.5, they have a scale. It's, I'd like to say it's actuarially calculated, but it's somewhat it's somewhat arbitrary, but it's actually not bad. It starts around 3% and the older you are, the bigger it gets. And it mandates that the money you've accumulated in any kind of deferred compensation plan, IRA, 401k, 401a, your retirement plan has to come out starting at age 70.5.
If you have different pots, you have to take it out of each pot, or you can just say...
No, you can, as long as you satisfy the percentage. You may have to contact your providers to make sure they know you're taking it all out of this pot. And I have to do that a lot because I don't want to take it spread out over all the pots usually. So the other thing you can do is put all your pots into one. So you have the right once you're retired to move your money in pots. All your qualified money can be rolled into one pot. It makes it a little easier. Some people don't want to do that. But when you have a spouse, my wife and I, between us, have 5 different retirement plans. You know, that's a lot of paperwork and tracking. It's a lot easier just to roll those all into one when we retire, and that's what we'll do. So there's just some things you can do. But the 70.5 is a mandatory withdrawal. Do you know it's possible you could accumulate too much money in your retirement plan? Why is that? Anybody know? Why could you accumulate too much money in your retirement plan? Taxes. So this is the key. I hope nobody in this room has this problem, but I run into it. If you put all of your retirement savings into a qualified retirement plan where you're tax deducting the contribution, the only way that money can come out, okay, is ordinary income. Ordinary income is taxed at the highest level. If I had dividend income, what would my tax rate be? 15 or 20. Or if you're making too much money, they got that new 3.8% surcharge. And you could have what's called alternative minimum tax, which for those of you who don't know, there's a lot of taxes you don't know about unless you start doing this stuff. But what is the tax on dividends? Same, 15% or 20%. What's the tax on your money coming out of your retirement plan? It's ordinary income. So whatever your bracket is, the beginning bracket is 15%. So for most of you, it's going to be higher than 15%. That's okay, but what if it jumps you from the bracket you are now to a higher bracket? Is it possible that you could retire and actually bracket yourself up? With mandatory distribution, it can. We see it. We actually see people accumulate too much money in a qualified plan. I hope everybody in this room has that problem. But it rarely does, but it does happen. I've had it happen a couple times in the last couple of years. So this mandatory distribution and when you distribute money is important. So even though there's a mandatory distribution at 70.5, does that mean you have to wait until you're 70.5 to take distributions? No, you can still take those distributions. What's the earliest you could take distributions? How many of you said 59.5? Actually, you can take it earlier. Did you know that? Sneaky, there's a way. So those who want to retire early, we can do it. It's called the 72T, little known law, that allows us to cheat, okay? So if those of you are interested in that, you can ask me that question later. But you can retire early, or earlier than 59.5. So now some employers have some rules about that, but we are sneaky. So we can figure out ways to do that. But generally, it's 59.5 is without penalty. Without penalty, you can start drawing your qualified plans. It will be taxed as ordinary income. That's really important. How's your Social Security taxed? Sort of, kind of, maybe. Okay? So some of it's ordinary income, but not all of it. How much of it is ordinary income? Depends. So if you're making less than $32,000 a year and you're single, okay, it's $35,000 a year and you're single, okay, there's no tax. If you're making less than $42,000 and you're married, couple, it's no tax. If you're making over $42,000, it's taxed at 85%. 85% of it is taxed at whatever rate you're at. Just seeing if you're awake, just seeing if you're awake. 85% of it will be included, but not 100%. So it's not as highly taxed. So which dollar do I pick at retirement if I have choices of different places of getting my retirement? So some of you could retire early and defer your retirement income to a different date. Did you know that? Okay, so how do you do that? That's planning. So that's just sort of kind of keep that in mind. That's way. So knowing these retirement rules and the tax impact. How many of you have a Roth IRA? You just want to complicate your life, don't you? All right. Q&A now? All right, so it's 10 till. I'm going to open up to Q&A. Anybody? Yeah, go ahead.
How do you factor like your real estate, your home into that?
Yeah, great question. How do you want to factor it in? Do you want to spend it, or do you want to pass it on to your kids? See, a lot of people don't know you can spend your house. Did you know that? You can spend your house and live in it, tax-free. Reverse mortgage. Is there any negative to a reverse mortgage? What's the negative? It isn't free. But for the right person in the right circumstance, it's a wonderful option, especially at certain ages.
And make sure both spouses are on the deed.
That's correct. Thank you. Yeah. Both spouses are on the deed. But the answer to your question is maybe, maybe not. Should I own my house outright? It certainly gives you a lot of other options. There are different philosophies about debt. I'm I don't like a lot of debt guy. So I think the older you are, the less debt you have, the less risk you have. But at the same time, there are people who argue that if at these low interest rates, I've got a 3-something% interest rate on my what's left on my house. I'm almost done, but that 3-something% interest rate deductible is maybe costing me 2-something%, and I'm earning a lot more than that in my investment. Why should I pay it off? I can afford to do that. That's not a bad decision. There are other people that I would say, look, knowing your pattern of how you spend money and how you save and how you manage debt, I recommend that you get out of debt. Some people just can't hang on to money. And if you're one of those people, you are. Get that. You are who you are. And sometimes you change, but rarely you don't.
Why is a Roth IRA bad?
It's not bad or good. It's different. That's really important to understand. So here's the rule. If you can tell me, or we can predict with some certainty, that your tax bracket is going to go up in retirement, and for many of you in this room, you'd be surprised that it is going to go up, a Roth is a good option. Because it's going to be what? It's going to be not tax deductible now and tax-free later. So it's a way to manage taxes, and it's another way to accumulate money for retirement. It fits a certain kind of person. The person who's been really good at retirement planning and who's accumulated a lot of money and looks like they're going to retire with equal or greater income at retirement, I would think a Roth IRA looks really good.
Wouldn't you use a Roth IRA first when you first come out? The impact when you started having to take a lot of money, so you can defer that, and then when your quote income goes down, then you go into your regular.
Maybe if in fact your income is going to go down, then the answer to that would be yes. But the answer to that varies greatly. Balancing where you draw the money from is really important, and when you start really varies depending on what you anticipate the tax rate is going to be. So what I do with every one of my clients is I actually run a tax return all the way out. I actually run tax returns. I can go to any year in the future and predict a tax return, and then I can look at with a Roth or without a Roth, and then we can help make that decision. But you're exactly right. I mean, that's a complicated thing sometimes, but that's what it takes to figure it out. Good thought, yeah.
He had his hand up before I did. So early on in your career, is there a rule of thumb on the percentage of income recommended to save for retirement?
I would start with, if you can, 10%. If you can't, start with what you can and add 1% a year. It doesn't take long to get up there. And if you can go above 10, I would. Other thing I would recommend is you don't save all your money in retirement plan. Does anybody know why? What happens if you save all your money in retirement plan? If you have an emergency, what do you have to do? You have to pay the penalty to get it out. And so you want to make sure that whatever you're saving in a retirement plan early, make sure you're saving some money outside until you get a good emergency fund. A good emergency fund is 3 to 6 months earnings. That covers you if you lose your job or whatever, to kind of cover those. And we've had layoffs, we've had cutbacks, all of us have been exposed to that. So that emergency fund is really, really important. That's why I started with budgets. Really important, yeah.
I've heard that if you wait till you're 70 to get your Social Security, that you're going to lose money.
Maybe. Tell me when you're going to die, and I'll give you the answer to that. And I don't mean to make fun of that.
No, I know you don't.
But it's how healthy you are. So if I meet you and you're 62, 65, and you're thinking about retirement, the first thing I'm going to ask you, tell me about your health. What's your life expectancy? How long did your parents live? We have to look at all the factors, and then we have to look and say, if I took it now versus I take it later, where would I draw the money from if I didn't draw from Social Security? And then we try to figure out what the best plan is. There are lots of analysis done. And then you've also got to figure out some rate of return, right? I mean, to figure out which way would be better. So we look at that and come up with the best possible scenario, and then we evaluate it continually. So it's a thing you look at constantly, yeah.
As a government employee, I believe that people should pay their taxes. But if there's an option in retirement to take up legal residence in another country, are there potential income tax savings from that?
Absolutely. Not from this country, but in that country, absolutely.
But I mean,
If you're permanent resident there, you're going to be in their tax rate. So and it varies from country to country. But we have people that move to Costa Rica, for example, is a really common one today, and it's a whole different planning process. Yeah, yeah. Interesting question. Yeah, go ahead. A little louder. I've got this fan. Yes. Long-term care at younger ages is really a good idea because it's gotten really expensive. But the statistics on how women, for example, have about a 70% probability of using long-term care. Men have a less than 50% chance, and we stay in much shorter. We die. The best picture of that I have is my 92-year-old father-in-law, who I'm caring for, is in a care center. And there are 42 people in there. There are only 3 men. All the others are ladies. They're amazing. Can you imagine his life? There's always 2 or 3 ladies around him all the time. It's just a crack. Yeah, go ahead.
So for those of us who don't have long-term care insurance, what's a good way to shop for it when you're, say, in your 50s kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, we even have companies now bailing on it. They won't even sell it. What's happened to the insurance companies, unfortunately, is these low interest rates, they have to reserve a large amount of your premium for way out into the future. They're earning nothing on that money. They're required to keep it very, very, in fact, they're required to keep a lot of it in bonds. And in order to keep their bonds protected, they're being forced to go to what's called short duration, low interest rate, and they're just not earning what they thought. The other problem is that people who bought long-term care insurance, the insurance companies anticipated they'd have about a 7% lapse rate, that people would, for whatever reason, would lapse their policy. And guess what? Nobody's lapsing their policies. So they're way under reserved, and so some companies have just, MetLife has stopped. There's like 8 or 9 companies that have just stopped selling it entirely. So there's a few companies still out there selling it, but they've jacked their premiums way up. And so if you're in your 50s, it's still palatable, but when you get to my age, it's getting really, I mean, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 a year in premiums gets pretty hard. So there are some things that are in between. There's sort of a combination of plans, and we tie that in with an attorney, and we can do some planning with the attorney and gifting and some things with the house. It's complicated, but we have some ways of getting around some of that long-term care burden. But there are ways to do it. A great question. One of my most difficult challenges is long-term care today. Very serious, but it's real. Yeah, go ahead. I charge them a lot. I look at every client, and my rule of thumb, my son gets really mad at me. He's much more, my rule of thumb is if you can't afford it, I do it for nothing. And if you can't afford it, I charge you. And you say, well, how do I do that? I look at the complexity, how much work I have to do. I lay it all out for you. I say, these are all the things that you need to do. Here's what we'll do, and here's how much we're going to charge you, and you hire me or you don't. And I do it mostly on your ability to pay. And I've learned that if I do that, I do the right thing for every client. Clients take care of me.
So there's no commission, you don't get any.
Yeah, the only time I do commission is if you call me and say, I want you to go find a life insurance policy for me. If you make me do that, I'm going to charge you, because the only way I can get paid on insurance products is commission, unfortunately. That's controlled by the government, not me. So then I have to take a commission.
Will,
Yeah.
thank you very much.
Am I done?
Yeah, we're done. So, folks, know that Retirement Operations is here. If you have any questions,